In the end, the Tyrannid fleet barely managed to land 1,000 assault spores, which was not enough to provide a proper Tyrannid occupation army. My corvettes bombarded the more distant landing sites, while marauder bombers and ground attack craft sorted to launch melter bombs and other incendiary ordnance on the closer landing sites, where orbital bombardment would be much too dangerous for our ground troops. Then we simply defended the Hive City's walls as billions of Tyrannids' bioforms crawled through fields of burning lava and artillery barrages, only to enter killing grounds of land mines, spinning flails, and turret lasers. Sadly, I couldn't take part in the last melee, being busy chasing down the void bioships and the last battleship-sized Hive ship, which would provide me with battleship-grade bioarmor from the attack claws of the Hive ship. The organic compound that made those claws was incredibly durable, which kinda made sense considering it had been evolved to crush spaceships. A millimeter-thick plate of Hive claw was more durable than a centimeter of ceramite, and much lighter. I guess I could sell it as a new organo-mineral, and use it as armor for boarding torpedoes and assault shuttles, or even drop pods and gunships. Anywhere weight was a limiting factor, from Sentinel Walkers to Guardian turrets and even Nightsaw Titans. The Eldar used something similar, those wraithbones of theirs allowing durable but light and agile Titans and starfighters. Humanity did not have something like that, but we could skin our enemies and wear them on the outside, much like we did with leather armor. I even tried my new toy, the transdimensional beamer, but Hiveclaw was not living rock and the Necron device didn't know how to shape it. Not yet. I bet Trazyn could find a patch fix for the new material. After that, I could dedicate some time to mass-produce durable components for my armies, especially for attack drones and ground attack craft, which were always the highest casualties in every deployment. By next month, Meridian was declared clean of Tyrannids, and my Lance-Fire forces began embarking on their Warplus carriers and cruisers, while the Lamenter Auxilia and the Lamenter Astartes and Tech Marines returned to our battle barges and drop cruisers. I think Gabriel Angelos was a bit envious on my military might, since we barely lost any units against an entire Tyrannid Hive fleet. I might have cheated a bit, but only to save lives. Machines could be replaced, but trained soldiers and pilots not that much. Is it really alright for an Astartes chapter to have so many auxiliary troops? A single one of your armor regiments is 10 times stronger than my own auxilia. The man muttered with a gruff voice. Probably not for the Blood Ravens, seeing as easily your Astartes fall to chaos, Master Angelos. Best if you ask Primarch Guilliman for a solution, preferably one that includes blank recruits and Silent Sisters watchers over your chapter. Then again, you can try it your way, and next time I might have to exterminate your chapter for corruption. It would be my duty, after all. I explained in a gentle voice, and smiled genially. The veteran Space Marine glared at me for a long minute, before glancing at the Ordo Hereticus Inquisitor at my side. Warning received, Master Lancefire. I shall travel to Ultramar and ask the Primarch for aid in this matter. You've let them get away too easy, Lord Pef. Best if I purge them now, before other traitors spring up from their midst. Adrastia muttered in a low voice, watching the big Marine walk away towards his shuttle. I sighed inward, knowing that Angelos certainly heard her. By your words, Lady Adrastia, I should exterminate and purge the Inquisition as well, before other traitors spring up from their midst. Correct? Rose giggled faintly and smiled at me, then she vanished in a flash of blue light. On the other hand, blanket accusations serve nobody. But, I shall keep an eye on the Blood Ravens even so. I fear the corruption will not be easily cleansed, even if I got all the traitors, Adrastia whispered and leaned on me, as the Blood Ravens shuttle departed the landing bay. I nodded with grim acceptance. The poor Blood Ravens carried the curse in their genes, most likely gene seeds from Magnus the Red, going by how many psychers sprang up. Come, my dear. Let's celebrate this grand victory in bed, and provide the Imperium with another incorruptible child. Your first blank son can join the Blood Ravens and serve as your inside man. I proposed with a cheerful voice. By the next week, my fleet was already en route to Forge World Akatran, so I could finish up another trade deal for more Katakan regiments and a new fleet carrier, in exchange for STC templates and more Blackstone. We arrived just in time to fend off a gigantic Orc war, composed of 3 space hulks, a dozen Terror ships, and thousands of smaller orc contraptions assembled from transport ships and orc carriers, as well as mobile asteroids. Akatran was a rather small forge, barely a tier 4 despite having a Titan Legion and a dozen orbital shipyards. Maybe my luck struck again, or they were situated much too close to a giant orc domain. Probably both. We managed to break up a space hulk before it could warp away, and captured 9 Terra ships more or less intact. My labyrinth collection grew with a billion more orcs, mostly the bigger or better armed, while my lamenters got to train with full armor and weapons clearing out the space hulk, and some even complained it was too easy. Well, it was much easier than the training we did at Levar with swords and shields, instead of Terminator power armors and rapiers and guardian turrets in support. Forge Akatran brought millions of Skitarii and combat servitors to speed things up, or it would take decades to clean up an entire space hulk made of thousands of wrecks and derelicts merged together. It was worth it anyway, as we looted a wealth of relic weapons, even more Astartes armor and a stasis pod filled with a dozen Heresy-era dreadnoughts, a couple of battle barges heavily damaged, 100 cruisers of different classes and even 2 battleships, an Emperor class and another Retribution. I immediately and generously donated the Emperor class to Forge Akatran, as the thing was too big and too expensive to repair. The Retribution battleship will be tracted to Forge Metallica for repair, as would a dozen more intact cruisers I set aside to become my new heavy drop cruiser squadron. Other nearby forges on my gift list would receive some spoils, in exchange for millions of tech acolytes and ship mechanics, and billions of tech servitors to work on new cruiser-size shipyards, here and at Machine Forge. It took almost an entire year to set up the spread of wealth in metal and technology, including a chain of warpless transmitters to Meridian and Forge Metallica. By then, Forge Akatran jumped an entire tier in Mechanicus ranks, reaching Tier 3 and access to extra technologies, including the production of Chimeras, Hydras and Macarius heavy tanks. In a few decades Akatran will have a battleship-sized Arc Mechanicus though, and probably climb one more rank. They just needed to import a lot of human resources and acolytes, and now they had the wealth for it. My time here was not wasted anyway. I also received 30 more Katakan regiments in trades with nearby forges, as well as 100 million immigrants and thousands of new tech priests. A couple of raids into the Orc domains cleared up a dozen planets as agro-worlds and mining settlements, while also providing live training for the new mechanized regiments and my Lamenter Astartes and Lancefire Knights. Meanwhile, Rose disappeared somewhere and returned with a dozen leather-wearing women, hailing from a death_cult called the Emperor's Blades. My implant marked them as dangerous and began highlighting power swords and daggers, vials of poison and neural gloves, and dozens of other unknown items which were certainly not massage sponges or acupuncture needles. I examined the sexy assassins with a frown, being quite certain it would mean death to touch those appetizing women. Blades, this is your new master, Pef Lancefire. You will serve him on to death, carry his children and kill his enemies. Now take off the leathers and let your master examine you. The Inquisitor commanded in a cold voice, as if these women were lower than trash. The women obeyed without comment, exposing themselves to my eyes and cautious fingers. Really, dear Rose? A death cult coven is your gift for me? I murmured while tracing my finger over faint scars and surgical sutures. Whoever worked on these women had been a flesh crafter, not quite a Margus biologist but close enough. I could bet a throne there were a dozen of adrenal and cyborg implants under the soft skin. Rose just smiled thinly and nodded. They work better in pairs, and are best deployed on hive worlds or at least industrial worlds, where their talents will allow them to blend in easily among the brutish cultists and gangers. And they can't speak? I wondered while opening a woman's mouth to examine her teeth. As expected, the teeth had been worked, containing poison capsules, both for attack or suicide. We can speak, Master. A red-haired woman replied shyly. And you agree to this? I asked, a bit curious. We have been told of your deeds, Lord Lancefire. You protect the Imperium and draw the ire of its enemies. We are to make sure those enemies die. The death cultist replied in a cold tone. I glanced at Raffen with a raised eyebrow. Your advice, Sergeant? The veteran Blood Angel measured the women and their arsenal with a cautious look. Induct them into your obsidian auguries, Captain. Lady Elixir would know best where to deploy them effectively. Otherwise, it would only take 2 days for your spear to convince them to become loyal. I sighed inward, and went to take a shower. These will be 2 long days. When I returned to Forge Machine, it had barely been 2 years yet the place was unrecognizable. 100 Mechanicus ships from different Forge worlds, and even a couple of Inquisitor black ships, now covered in expensive blackstone and being outfitted with extra torpedo cells and drop pods. Someone had been paying attention, copying my tactics both for orbital and planetary combat. Inside the Pharos, a coterie of no less than 6 Inquisitor ladies were busy interrogating the trapped Catan, sitting on blackstone benches and writing down his words like gospel. Zorhulash blinked towards me in the same second I checked inside the Pharos with my Tesseract labyrinth. Pef Lancefire has finally returned, Inquisitors. Part 34 of the War in Heaven history will have to wait. The Catan explained in a wry voice. Lady Villain glanced in my direction as well, although she couldn't have possibly, unless she gained some control over her own Tesseract. Indeed, Lord Lancefire has arrived in system. You have been very helpful, mighty Zorhulash. The woman announced politely and tapped the floor with her bone staff, and vanished. She reappeared on the moon, right beside Lady Day. Pef is back, my dear Princeps. Have you finished the report on the Horus Heresy era? The Titan pilot nodded and held out a data stack. Everything I remember, from birth to death, or whatever this new life is. You will have to compile the rest of the picked image from my moderator's memories. Yes, I will do that, Princeps Lancefire. As for your mystery, I do have some clues now. Although a stasis field does sound as the more probable method for your unlikely salvation, I also believe it's incorrect. My classified source has revealed a dozen different ways to achieve your temporal dislocation and none of them involve a stasis field, Villain said with a wry smile, and vanished again. Damn woman. Don't ruin my marriage with your suspicions. Perhaps giving the Inquisitors access to Zorhulash and his well of arcane knowledge wasn't all good. Then again, knowledge was power and Zorhulash was ancient even compared to the Necrons. If I wanted to beat the Necrons, I needed ways to defeat their advanced technology. That meant pinpointing weak points in the Necron defenses, flaws in their knowledge and operating instructions and many such advantages. A couple of hours later, I teleported inside the Pharos as well and released Raffen and Canis from the labyrinth. Ladies, I hope you have received many lessons from the resident Catan? I asked politely. A dozen pairs of eyes blinked at me, most of them related to me, except for Inquisitor Carmelus. We have learned of your adventures, Master Lancefire. At least this time you avoided massacring an entire Astartes chapter, by appealing to the Inquisition to prosecute the traitors. The old woman muttered, and nodded approvingly. I shrugged and went to kiss my lovers, and ignored the old witch. If the Astartes were blanks they wouldn't fall to chaos at all. Something the Emperor himself was working to address, as shown by his Silent Sisters and Ordo Sinister programs. Too bad those traitors on Terra desired to rule with psycho powers and without any controls, thus the persecution of blanks and pariahs. I explained in a stern voice, pointing an accusing finger at the female Lord Inquisitor. The woman held my gaze for a minute, before glancing away. I'll wait on my cruiser, Lord Lancefire. It is obvious we will never see eye to eye, she declared in a dignified voice and stepped on the teleport pad. As long as you avoid hurting my interests in the Eastern Fringe, we can be allies, Lady Carmelus. I advised her just before she teleported away. Pef Lancefire, you should know that 14 warp rifts were closed and 2 warp storms have been reduced by our friends. The Catan spoke with a rumbling voice, surprising the remaining Inquisitors. I just nodded and took out the sounding board to check on latest developments. It seemed Overlord Trazyn and his followers had been busy, clearing a path towards the Maelstrom and closing interface ports with the Immaterium. Perhaps not for the exact reasons you may suspect. 100 Orc planets were also conquered and hundreds more worlds were being invaded right now. The Necron wizard was expanding his influence, and increased the size of his dynasty. Lord Trazyn, setting up a small stellar empire for yourself? I asked the Necron with a mind transmission. Oh, the stranger is back, and much sooner this time. Well, Bardic has fallen as you promised. I expect you're in need of another trade? Trazyn asked while taking out a data slate. I did want better technologies, but most of all, I wanted something else. The Halo_device, if it works, I said curtly. Ah yes. The effects of that device are rather strange, even for me and my orange helpers. Only the orcs seem to survive the transformation with any degree of sanity, though for orcs that's very low anyway. I needed a few billion test subjects to finalize a less aggressive variant. The wizard admitted with a wave of his robotic hands. And no human or Necrons. Perhaps Dark Eldar? I wondered, curious. Not yet, puppy stranger. What I can tell you is that the devices are not medical machines, nor psycho artifacts, but a type of transdimensional interface. Something at the other end is configuring the receptacles for a kind of database download. The orc brains are luckily completely empty and self-erasing. All we obtained are orcs 50 meters tall and even more savage. Trizin complained and produced such a gigantic orc held by thick chains of living rock, easily as large as Catan or a medium titan. I mused on this for a minute. The Tyranids should adapt to anything. Perhaps the Kroot or Bargasi as well. I expect the Jokero simply died? I added in a teasing tone. The old ones had surely encountered the Halo Star civilization, and were likely the ones that destroyed them. No wonder the races they created were not compatible, most likely by design. The Jokero managed to control the device to craft a teleporter, and attempted to escape or suicide. His body was splattered over a whole deck. Trizin the Infinite explained, seeming outraged. I closed the link and turned, as Villain arrived inside the Pharos and came to hug me. Glad to see you, Peth. And look, I figured out what this thing is, she whispered, holding the silver cube, and pressed 3 runes at once, making a Necron engram project in a miniature star system. I sighed inward and took her toy away before she blew up my new forged world. Then I took out my dataslate and projected a galactic map from it. Stop playing with pocket universes, my dear. And you, mighty Zorhulash. You should know better. I growled at the chained Catan. Hey, it was a harmless function, Pef Lancefire. Merely a real-time window. The ancient star god muttered like a naughty child. Damn galaxy was doomed with idiots like these. In a second, I sent the cube over to Trizin. Please make a manual for this, before my agent blows up a sun, by accident. She already figured out a dozen functions, simply by pressing runes at random. The Necron examined the cube and sighed, then took out an identical silver cube. I'll keep the sleeping army for myself. Here, take this pocket tesseract and a dozen titans in exchange. Plus the dataslate with the latest technologies. But no crew. Damn titan pilots are too rare, unlike those unsightly robots. I'll make them new ones and better. With a twist, I collected the trade goods and began downloading the manual on my implant, learning how to operate yet another Necron device. What did you do? Villain demanded in an irate voice. I just held out the data stick manual. Learn the manual before you play with the Doomsday device, my dear Xenos expert. I explained and stepped out from the Pharos and beside my princeps wife. Pef. You're a bad husband and father. Your son can already walk, and you're never around. The woman complained and smacked my head, not very happy. I nodded and drew her into a hug. Sorry, love. I worked hard to acquire resources for our family. Spaceships, ancient technologies and a Titan manipul, I whispered in her ear and showed her the silver cube as proof. Day was quite smart, and realized what I held in my hand. A portable storage dimension, and it can hold Titans inside? She asked in a breathless voice. Exactly, dear Day. But that can wait. First we visit my son, and then the bedroom, I continued in a teasing voice. My wife hesitated for a moment, before relenting. I guess you did work hard, husband. You are still allowed in my bed, as long as you bring me such nice gifts. Perhaps she'll get more mellow with time? I thought about all those other women in my life, and they were just as demanding. Probably not then. Fabricator Gemina arrived in a single minute, as soon as the new Titans appeared in the Titan hangar. 2 more Warhounds, 2 Reavers, 7 Warlords and 1 Emperor-class Titan, the largest and most powerful of the god machines. Of course, the Emperor was burdened to carry 2 cathedrals on its shoulders, abusing and encumbering the mighty war machine to its limit. Not in my machine legion it will not, plus all those sanctified cathedrals and relics inside will be very useful to decorate my kingdom and attract devout believers. Faith was very important, as it kept the citizens safe from chaos and made them more productive, religious zeal and all that. Lord Lancefire, where did these titans come from? The female tech priest demanded with obvious surprise. Not exactly sure, my dear fabricator. A donation from a pious believer in the Omnissiah, most likely. I answered with a fake shrug. The woman glared at me for my obvious lie, then gestured something with her 2 mechadendrites. Yes, she only had 2, which was proof of amazing restraint in a tech priestess. The Tigress Eye of Judgment was thought lost during the Horus Heresy. Last known records of the God Machine place it as deployed to support the Ultramarines, possibly on Calth. She explained, pointing at a Warlord Titan with forged Tigress markings. Anyway, remove those cathedrals and have them sent to Salvation and Natale, before you begin repairs on the Emperor class. I'm certain the Sisters of Battle will be overjoyed for my gift, as will the Titan himself. I ordered in a casual voice, and turned away. You can't just expect, of course he does. The fabricator muttered towards my back, watching me greet inquisitive Elaine and pat her bottom. If you tell me there were Titans, held in stasis in my cube, I will smack you, Lord Pef. The Inquisitor warned me, sounding serious. Then I won't tell you that, my dear. You managed to learn how to use it yet? I asked while holding the silver cube in my free palm. Still learning the manual. It might take me years. Verlaine complained and leaned into me, possibly enjoying me fondling her ass. I sighed inward but didn't press her again, as not everyone would enjoy having their skulls open to install a mind impulse unit, and Psyche's least of all. I have a couple of free weeks, my love. Getting the fleet refit and upgraded, torpedoes and missiles replenished and all that. Want to reserve a slot in my bedroom schedule? I asked in a teasing voice. Damn idiot. Verlaine complained without rejecting my offer. Much later, I snuck out from the pile of sweaty and sleeping bodies of my inquisitorial harem and went to take a gradually colder shower, until my mind cleared. This was a dangerous game I was playing, but I would need trustworthy inquisitors to place in positions of power. Same with generals, admirals, and governors, even bishops. As long as they were members of my family. All I needed was time, to allow my last perk to grow and reach its full potential. The ancient awakening was activating very slowly, but I was growing in mind, and body and possibly soul as well. And just like with the Primarchs, or the Paternova Navigators, my descendants will receive benefits as well, reflections of my genes boosting their own powers even more. No doubt, using the Pharos to observe the sector of the galaxy contributed to this as well, forcefully opening my mind to allow empathic communication and matter transfer over thousands of light years. I knew I had about 50 years left of relative peace, before all hells broke loose, literally. Didn't have much hope to stop it completely, although I could reduce the impact a bit, at least in areas that I could watch over directly. The galaxy was too big and the array of enemies too great. The Dark Eldar that had undoubtedly survived would need time to recover and regroup, and hopefully direct their anger at the Eldar. The Tau were busy turtling themselves against constant attacks, from all their usual enemies plus demonic incursions and Necron raids on their allies. The Necrons had yet to awaken en masse, and I kept watch, burning emerging tomb worlds or directing orcs or Tyranids at the Necron crown worlds, which had war fleets and Katana's defenses. Orcs were a plague for which I was crafting a cure made of glass, although live tests of the glass virus were not yet successful. The virus was not easily controlled to target only orcs, and it rapidly mutated to vitrify all life, which didn't help as much as it sounds. Luckily, the counteragent copied from the Dark Eldar still worked. As for Chaos, I had my own plans to ambush Abaddon the Despoiler when he began his Pandarax campaign. But for those Chaos Gods, one champion was as good as the next one. And I wasn't certain I could kill or trap Abaddon anyway. Damn guy had his own luck perk, and reality bent to his will to provide opportunities and artifacts just like it did for me. I had my own cheats, and enough ships and troops to make it a fair fight anyway. By the time the vacation was over, my Inquisitor ladies were pregnant again, as were the imported Princeps ladies and the Death Cult girls. For now, I detached half of them as assassins for my Inquisitor friends, while the rest were being sent to Elivar to become Elixir's enforcers. On Elivar, Victor was already ruling as governor and I agreed to his promotion without a blink. It wasn't like I actually had time to rule a hive world and manage their problems directly. Better spend a year in blank city, and enjoy 1,000 blank concubines set aside for me. The noble concubines got their due as well, and their blank daughters and rarely sons were sent into the colonies as colonial governors. It sounds great for them, until they realized they were tasked with growing and managing 1 billion people and 1,000 small cities over the next century. Where possible, I assigned blank men to join their retinue and provide blank genes for a new nobility, which sounds great until you realize how hard it is to impregnate 1,000 women. Really, it is hard work, especially for someone without angel genes. And when you finally reach the end of the queue, you have to start again. I know, because I had this fucking job for decades. Wives and lovers are nice and fun, but it gets less fun with concubines that you barely recall their names. Not the case with the pretty Elixir and my wife Serena sharing my bed right now, just for pleasure and relaxation. I filled them both with love, and then let them rest on my chest and legs, breathing heavily in afterglow. My lord, if you keep importing immigrants, the food production and the housing capacity will be overwhelmed, Serena complained after she regained her voice. And we will dig subterranean hives, for each new billion. I want to reach at least 100 billion citizens both here and on Natale. Geothermal pits and cometary ice will sustain the hive worlds for millennia, without impacting the environment too much. I've seen how much hive worlds can produce, and I want that for our domains. Plus recruiting troops and crew for ships will be easier, I explained in a serious voice. More work for me then. Monitoring hive cities is not easy, Lord Pef. Elixir muttered and licked my spear to prove her point. The new hive cities will have integrated surveillance and tracker implants for everyone. And when the time is right, the current hive cities will be demolished and the population moved underground as well, I explained in a sharp breath, as her blowjob was suddenly stronger and much more pleasant. Elixir was probably happy at the prospect of total surveillance, just like any infocyte would be. Serena wasn't that pleased, as she bit my ear quite hard. That will be very difficult to sell to our nobles, dear husband. They enjoy their freedoms. There is nothing to sell, Serena. My wishes will be made laws, and those caught without implants will become criminals and get punished. The mines always need more servitors, I said sternly and drew my wife into a long kiss. Our battle resumed savagely, until Serena was felled and drifted to sleep. My eyes turned towards the other red-headed minx who was licking her fingers teasingly. Am I going to be punished too? Ah, not there, don't ever stop, Elixir exclaimed while being pounded into submission. She kinda enjoyed it, I guess. An hour later, I arrived on the Starfoot in high orbit, to observe the new recruits and their gene seed implants. My son, Aeneas, already had minor psyker powers, despite being blank, so he would be the first librarian in my chapter. He already had 40 blank kids of his own, and I shouldn't delay his implantation too long. Are you certain we should use the Blood Raven's gene seed, Chapter Master? My sanguinary priest asked, sounding doubtful. Yes, I am sure, brother. I've promised Master Angelo's a company of blank recruits, and we have to be certain how the gene seed reacts. And prepare 10 more recruits for next week. Different fathers for all of them, of course. We need a larger range for a test sample, I ordered with a frown. I wasn't certain how the natural blanks will react with the Astartes gene seed, but I expected problems. While Aeneas and other descendants from my bloodline would be safe, natural blanks were a completely different story. And indeed, Aeneas passed his implantation procedure without any problems, instead gaining gamma-level psycho powers. Now the boy will need a decade or two of training, while the Astartes organs were implanted. As for the other 10 blank recruits, things went bad very fast and only 2 boys survived the Blood Raven's gene seed, while the other 8 entered some kind of poison shock and were stored in stasis pods until I could find a cure. If there even was a cure. There went my hopes, right out the window. The blank city has failed its purpose, and I needed to find another way. Maybe, I would need recursive eugenics and pair the natural blanks with females of my bloodline for a stable genome able to support a librarian caste. Time to schedule a meeting with the Adepta Sororitas. The cadet seminary hall was packed full today as the greatest hero of the fringe, meaning me, was sharing a few lessons with the aspiring officers. But first, I flicked a thrown coin right at Valerian's ear, waking him up from his psychotrance. Valerian might be Finona's son, but not even he was exempt from being respectful. Now that we are all paying attention, direct your eyes above my head. Tell me what you see. I demanded, pointing at a teenage girl enrolled for piloting classes. It's the Aquila, Lord Lancefire. The symbol of the Imperium and the Imperial Creed. She answered a bit timidly, seeing the brass ornament but ignoring its meaning, just like nearly everyone. Excellent answer, cadet. But wrong. I exclaimed and pointed at another girl. A daughter of mine named Ramona, blonde and pretty as an angel. It is the symbol of the Imperium, Lord Lancefire. The Imperial Creed also uses it. Ramona muttered, a bit confused. Good. There is a great distinction here. If there was just an eagle, it wouldn't matter at all. But this Aquila has 2 heads. Why? I asked, pointing at another cadet. The young man glanced at the eagle and frowned. It is how the Imperium was formed, sir. The Emperor and the tech priests from Mars, joining together to start the Great Crusade. I nodded in agreement. So this Imperial Creed worships Mars and the Emperor then? I asked another cadet. No, sir. Only the Emperor. The Asian-looking boy answered calmly and patted his chest where the same Aquila was stamped. I sighed inward and gestured at the holoscreen behind me. You all better remember this clearly. The Imperium is the Emperor and the Forge. Other imperial institutions that formed afterwards, like the Ecclesiarchy and even the Inquisition, are not meant to be part of the Imperium. Not the Adeptus Sororitas, nor the Officio Assassinorum and the many imperial Delph cults. Those are all vultures, preying on the citizens of the Imperium. Questions? I asked in a loud voice. My lord, the tech priests are heretics. And while the creed indeed formed after the God Emperor laid down on the Golden Throne, it is fundamentally important for the salvation of the human race. A devout believer yelled at me, holding his Aquila as a shield. Faith is important. Again, a big distinction here, cadet. We know the Emperor protects and safeguards our souls in the afterlife. Now, does humanity need bishops and cathedrals to be saved? I personally don't need anyone to tell me what to believe, because the blood of Sanguinius flows through my veins. 4 times in my life, an angel sent by the Emperor came to my aid. But perhaps for those with weak souls and feeble faith, they do need to be led into prayer by a bishop. It is also the only reason I even allow cathedrals and sisters in my dynasty. I also allow tech priests. Why? I asked, pointing at Valerian. They make ships and tanks. Why else? Valerian muttered in disgust. You say that, and seem displeased, cadet. Are you saying the Emperor was in error to sign the Olympus Treaty? What other errors in our Emperor's conduct would you like to point out for your fellow cadets? I asked rhetorically. 1,000 eyes stared accusingly at the poor boy, although they shared his views even so. I demanded, pointing at another cadet. The Emperor surely had good reasons, sir. But it was possibly a temporary measure, until the galaxy was united. The boy claimed in a doubtful voice. Of course. What other temporary measures then? The Astronomicon? The Adeptus Astartes? The Silent Sisters? Shall we just destroy everything the Emperor did, and claim it was merely a temporary measure? Already the High Lords of Terror have exiled the Silent Sisters from the Imperial Palace. Let's turn off the Astronomicon next. Correct? I wondered with a wry voice. A single month of losing the light of the Astronomicon would paralyze the Imperium. Turning it off would be a death blow. They all knew it, even here in the fringe. I had already pointed the beacon of the Pharos at Pythos, while preparing the ground for the next fight. A couple of Tyrannid hive fleets and Orcas would cover my own agenda quite nicely. No, sir. And we are also not in the Imperium, not until you decide to create a new Imperial sector. The cadet answered with a lower voice. I like things as they are now, cadet. With my warrant of trade, I speak with the Emperor's voice. Because of that, my words are the law here in the Lancefire domain, and our worlds are not crawling with cultists and criminal gangs like in the Imperium. You will all soon pilot shuttles or starfighters or even become captains. And when you do, and are sent to trade in the Imperium, you will see the squalor of those worlds. You will beg me to never allow our worlds to join the putrid corruption that is the Imperium right now. Back to tech priests. I pointed at another cadet. They worship the machine god and believe the Emperor is their omniscire. Don't know much more, sir. The girl replied anxiously. Correct. Now, to understand the Forge and the tech priests would take decades of study. But I'll give you a short history. Back in the Age of Strife, the advanced human worlds in the galaxy found themselves isolated by warp storms, attacked by millions of rogue psykers and demons, while the machines they were used to became savage beasts, shredding the people with metal claws and laser eyes. Very few civilized worlds survived at all, and those became Forge worlds. There was a motive these worlds survived and not the rest. Those engineers and technicians overseeing the machines learned the operating manuals and the repair protocols by rote, and repeated them to their descendants. In 5,000 years, those lessons became prayers and machine canticles, but they also kept the machines working. Adding oils and incense to the rituals helped keep demons away, and thus they survived. And then one day, the warp storms cleared and only the Eye of Terror remained, a gateway into the Immaterium and the horrors beyond. I narrated while images scrolled on the holoscreen. And then, only the tech priests knew how to use machines. Well, them and the Emperor on Terra, Ramona said with a knowing tone. Pretty much, yes. And thus the Imperium was born. The Forge and the Emperor working together to unite the galaxy again. And leading the way were the rogue traders, empowered with warrants of trade to deal with Xenos, acquire navigation routes and pinpoint enemies for the following fleets of the Great Crusade. The Forge kept the monopoly on technology, and took over the surviving Forge worlds into their domain. The Navius nobility or the navigator houses were formed to guide the ships into the warp, and every religion found was destroyed and obliterated. All religions but one, the cult Mechonicus. I pointed at another cadet. Well, it seems obvious the Emperor did not consider the tech priests to be heretics. Perhaps only annoying? The boy replied with a question, which was mildly amusing. You forget something, cadet. The Emperor did not need to learn machine manuals by rote. He was immortal, and he had lived in the dark age of technology. He also had the brains to understand the complex science behind any machine. For the tech priests, his intellect and knowledge of the machines were amazingly miraculous. Or to put it simply, he was the best tech priest of them all. I believe the Emperor felt pity, not annoyance with his machine-worshipping followers. Imagine looking at clouds, and hearing your naive siblings argue if they form a crown or bird. You know it's only water and feel pity, I concluded and teleported away. I returned to the Starfleet, and opened the galactic map on my cogitator. Decimar had been updating my simulations, keeping track of imports and exports and numbers for population growth. My domain was growing very fast, but not fast enough. I will need billions of new immigrants and a billion tech priests, if slightly better educated with each generation. The geniuses will be selected for my special research teams, and given the best technical training I could steal from the Tau, and the Demiurge and any nearby races with advanced technology. It seemed a new round of heavy trading was needed, sending all available ships and captains to Ultima Segmentum Forge worlds, and a few just beyond, like Griffon 4 in the south and Lucius in the north, plus the big forges like Ryza and Grya. They could carry Dark Eldar and Necron artifacts, plus few Tau and Eldar weapons. The STC templates would need to be customized for every forge to make them more attractive and valuable, plus targeting data on nearby Necron or Orc worlds. Did I shamelessly ask for all female regiments and any blanks or pariah they could provide? I sure did. Did I ask Forge Ryza for 200 Katakan regiments to pacify the fringe? Yes, I did. But I also earmarked a transport of 40,000 armed sentinels and tarantula turrets and a billion multispectrum vaccines doses to be donated to Katakan citizens. I may drain their manpower, but I'll not leave them defenseless on that death world. Combat walkers were powerful force multipliers, and medication for an entire planet even more. I was also pretty sure that Finona and her Katakan husband will be able to induce an immigration drive for my domains, even if it would be only kids and women, sent to the paradise worlds filled with untamed forests and savage orcs in the eastern fringe. Perhaps send 1,000,000 adamantium swords as well, and flak armor with blackstone armor plates. Sure, why not? The Katakans were not stupid, even if forced to live in near servitude on a jungle planet where everything could kill you. Plans made, I raised my eyes to look at Dreadnought Chiron, who just entered my quarters. Yes, brother? We have a problem, Chapter Master. A dozen apothecaries have defected while pretending to search for new herbs. I fear your blank women escorting them have. He rumbled in a cold voice. I sighed inward and stood up. Come with me then. Any clues on why they would turn traitor? I asked while heading towards the docking bay. The apothecaries and the sanguinary priests, plus a few tech marines and various support personnel are the remains of the original, cursed, lamenters, which of course implies all the chaos fuckery possible. Like a minor plant collection expedition turning traitor when away from their base and my watchful gaze. I suspect it was the failures of the Blood Raven's gene seed, my lord. Others have also voiced displeasure at using such corrupted gene seed, that even poisons blanks, Chiron said in a level voice, possibly agreeing with the defectors then. It would happen even with Primarch's Khan or sanguineous gene seed, my friend. That's why I demanded test recruits from 11 different fathers, not just my own sons. The 3 recruits that survived, all have my genes or my children's genes. I am the reason, not the gene seed, I whispered as we reached the docking bay. I looked at the airlock door, to find Hestia and Fidelia already armed for war. They have the right to avenge their sisters, Captain. I heard Raven murmur on the manifold. All right. The more the merrier. Plus I could use the sisters to relax on the way to the Pharos. Damn crazy universe. I'm not sure how the idiot apothecaries thought they could run away and become a new fallen group, but I wasn't going to let them go. Not after I was just making fun of Gabriel Angelos for losing so many of his own brothers to chaos corruption. And even less after finding the Lamenter destroyer filled with desecrated and eaten corpses of the crew. Not the blank sisters, which were beaten up and thrown into the ship's vault. Probably not good eating, unlike the rest of the crew. Having a meal, are we? I asked after stepping out of the Pharos right in the mess hall. A dozen pairs of red eyes turned towards me, then looked around as my own escorts appeared around them. It's all your fault. One of them howled and jumped at me with fangs bared and claws extended. Damn mutations had distorted these former apothecaries into vampiric forms, identical to those lamenters lost in the Badab War. The bodies malformed under the red thirst and the black rage. I just stepped back and let my brave Canis grab a bite. Limb after limb, the cretin was torn apart, until only the head and torso remained, and he was taken to the side by Hestia for a crude cauterization of wounds, involving a melter pistol and red-hot deck plates. Good boy. Now the rest of the traitors, I commanded in a cold voice. In a minute, we had the idiots disarmed and nailed to the wall, while I collected the beat-up sisters in my tesseract. These were not veterans or null maidens, and they obviously stood no chance against real space marines attacking them by surprise, and even being fed drugs and soporifics in their meals. Then I patted Chiron on his armored shoulder. Have the navigator steer the ship back to the Starfoot. I'll collect the body parts and read the ship logs from the bridge. Canis glanced at me and then at the mangled traitors hooked to the wall. Woo? Nah, we need to test the omophage organs anyway. These guys will serve the task perfectly, I explained in a serious voice. Canis grumbled and dragged a few discarded limbs to the side, crunching them for a healthy meal rich in calcium, while the victims could only stare as their arms and legs were being devoured by my Fenrisian wolf. I shrugged and walked away towards the bridge. Waste not and all. Plus Canis had worked hard for this meal. So you're not going to kill them? Rafn asked as I sat down in the bloody captain chair and began examining the ship logs. Kill them? How would I train the lamenters then? They need to taste the truth, and learn from the mistakes of their brothers. Henna will not be pleased her daughter was eaten though. I muttered holding up my glove, drenched my daughter's blood. Being a ship captain was risky, much more so for an Astartes warship. Poor Talia, she was so glad to have finally earned the captain rank. At least it wasn't Tyranids. We will probably all get eaten by Tyranids in the end. Soon after, the Lamenter destroyer reached the warp limit and began the journey home, estimated to last 3 to 30 days. Damn warp travel, I've forgotten how crappy it was. At least my big ships had warpless engines now, and were not so exposed anymore like the smaller escorts. As expected, we only arrived 28 days later, because the warp currents were opposed or something like that. All 3 backup mechanical Geller generators had failed as well, and one even caught fire and melted. The main Geller field held, just because Hestia and Fidelia took turns sleeping inside the generatorium and protecting the black box component from unwanted visitors. Chiron had to patrol the lower decks and crush hundreds of wailing servitors, exorcising the ghosts in their machine implants. Damn 40k universe. I'll have to sell this ship to someone else now, after changing its name to something appropriate like Emperor's Triumph. Anyway, I had other more important business to take care of, besides creating a remembrance hall where the Lamenters would visit each month and scoop live brains from these cretins to train their memory-reading organ. Business like clearing another hull from the space hulk anchored in pieces in the asteroid field, giving my troops more live training against orcs and genestealers and even a few Dark Eldar from my own stock. It would take about 2 years till the trade expeditions returned, which was just enough time to polish my skills in the Lamenters, plus their blank sisters and tech marines. I also started from level 1, climbing my way through infested decks with only a chrono sword and a bolt pistol. I kinda cheated a bit, because the tesseract around my neck did give me perfect vision and denied surprise to the enemy, but I also had to keep watch for everyone else and save them at the last second. Captain Khan just walked beside me, and commented on my technique and breath patterns, while ignoring the howling genestealers or orcs and allowing me to gain combat experience. Keep your stance lower, Lord Peth. Strike at the wrist, not at their weapon. Breathe. Remember to breathe. He advised me as my lungs caught fire from dispatching 5 genestealers at once. What? It was really hard, especially on slippery floors, and eerie blinking lights. Reaching level 5 took all my energy, and I had to rest and gulp some water and Nutrigruel. It was much easier in my night, sitting in a comfortable throne Mechonicus and having reason smoothly execute combat stances and perfect cuts with machine precision. Using your own body wasn't that much fun, unlike in bed. Anyway, by the 2nd year, I had reached deck 10, and needed Canis to cover my back at all times. But my aim with a pistol had become almost perfect, and my lungs didn't burn that bad anymore. About as well as any new recruit with a full set of Astartes organs, which wasn't bad at all. I'll have to send Slimabo in one day, and learn from him too. I could already bet the man will make it to level 15 without a single scratch. Damn cheater. But my free time was up. No more Space Hulk training, brothers. We'll depart for Pythos next week, so rest and clean your weapons. There will be orcs, tyrannids and chaos traitors, so only blank or warded personnel can go. Brother Semnai, you will have field command for our ground troops. Brother Chiron, you have the Starfleet. I'll take the fleet and some Lancefire units in support. My wife Day will arrive with some reinforcements from Machine Forge. I explained while pointing at the holoscreen. I selected 3 Elementa battle barges and 15 drop cruisers, while from the Lancefire fleet I highlighted 2 battleships, 2 battle cruisers and 2 carriers, plus 15 heavy cruisers, all with warpless engines. The battleships were the real heavy hitters, the Apocalypse class called Tranquility and the Retribution class called Vigil for the Vanquished, formerly known as Macarius Vitrix. Looking at the battleships, you could barely distinguish the original class, as they had 3 torpedo cells each, meaning 300 torpedoes, plus 200 lance batteries and extensive armor upgrades, layers of adamantium and blackstone covered with a dozen void shields plus a flare shield and an iron shield. And they also had a Nova cannon, because those were awesome. The latest upgrade simply bolted 40,000 tarantula turrets on the battleship's outer hull, with a mix of missiles, multi-lasers and las cannons weapons. Every possible angle had been covered, although the weapons would only be effective against small targets like starfighters and orc fighter bombers or tyrannid flying creatures. Maybe torpedoes and assault boats too, in some cases. Lacking dedicated escorts like frigates and destroyers or even light cruisers meant that heavy ships would be vulnerable, so I took measures. The cruisers also had some turrets applied on the hulls, but not in such large numbers, only a few hundreds. Of course, these applique turrets were not powered by the ship itself, instead using their own power source, which was more limited. Anyway, much better than nothing. Now I only had to test the ships in battle, for battle was the ultimate testing ground. When your enemies tried every trick and weapon they had to kill you. I doubted the Logi engines of the Tarantula would be effective against Chaos Demon engines, but everything else should be good. The Tech Marines and their Guardian turrets would serve mostly as boarding guards, 2 aboard each ship and 5 on the battleships. We also had 20 Katakan auxiliary regiments and the Lance-Fire Voidsmen, plus 3 armored regiments ready to land and support an assault. By the time the fleet was prepared and gathered, Day arrived from Forge Machine with 1,000,000 Scutari and our incipient Deus Ex Machina Titan Legion, composed of 30 Titans including 1 Emperor class and 7 Warlord class. We had more Scout Titans, but we lacked pilots for them. It wasn't a problem I ever expected to have, to be fair. But I did have 36 Lance-Fire Knights to support these Titans anyway, plus their own support armsmen, 4,000 Katakans piloting armed sentinels, and various light vehicles for skirmishing and recon. The Knights and Titans had also been plated with Blackstone, because that material was fucking amazing, both in durability and resistance against warp. Rose and Villain decided to join me on this crusade, something I was kinda glad for. Sometimes having a powerful psyker on your side was great. And they were pleasant company in bed anyway.